All right, guys. Well, I'm showing noon. It is March 25th. We are basically 3 months into the year. There's 9 left. And I'll tell you, last week I was on vacation and I was in the panhandle of Florida in Destin. The sun was shining, it was blue skies, but a little too cold to enjoy the sand or the water. So, but it was a great time to get away. And I feel all recovered now. And guess what? There's more of these doggone questions that keep coming up with how do I handle this particular situation? So today's hot topic, that's what we're going to get into, is the aspect of situations. So here's the first one, and we'll do this a little bit interactive, but listing agent shows a complete stranger their own listing who asks the listing agent to write the offer because they want to buy it. So keeping it simple, listing agent, somebody says, I want to buy it. They don't know who they are. What is the agent's relationship to the buyer? What do we have? This is group participation time.
Customer.
We have a customer. And I think that was the real key is what's in the best interest of our current client. So we're going to operate with this individual as a customer, right? It is the reason that we do not need an agreement with this buyer because we represent the seller. We know that when we have that distant relationship, we're going to hold that relationship tight to the vest, and therefore we're going to treat them as a customer. So what paperwork is necessary then?
Agency for the seller, so they're aware that you're representing just the seller.
I like that, Deanna. Absolutely right. Matter of fact, we'll simplify it. All of the normal paperwork that we have for the seller, right? What do we need with the buyer? Keep it simple. Well, what paperwork do we need for the buyer? So they're a customer, we're representing the seller. We're going to need a purchase agreement, and I should have done it the right way. The agency disclosure for the buyer, right? You got it. So I need to, because we need to disclose to all parties what our relationship is to them. And in this case, what would we be? Keep it simple. Whom do you represent?
Seller.
The seller. So when I disclose to the buyer, what do I check off? Seller's agent. And of course, we know we're a designated agency company, so that's automatically checked off. But keeping it simple, that's really all we need. Now, should we still do the affiliated business disclosure? Yes. Should we do the wire fraud? Yes. But we're just talking that basic part of what do we really got to have in this particular scenario. So to keep it simple, but the one thing it seems to be that people will actually forget is that it's just the agency disclosure. And of course, the biggie is that I do not need to represent the buyer. I do not need to have an agreement because I'm representing the seller. Okay? Everybody good there? Any questions on that one? I think we're set. Situation number 2. Now, your best friend, notice I put it in all caps, I'm leading you on this one, comes to asking you to handle a closing on a home that they found. This is going to sound familiar if you're on with me a couple weeks back. All the terms have been worked out. You just have to put it on paper and close it. What is your relationship you're going to have with this friend?
Transaction coordinator.
I hear transaction coordinator. Now, somebody else has got to jump in this so that we have a great discussion. Who thinks that it would be something different? Who's bold enough to come off of silence and disagree with Deanna?
Larry, don't do it.
By the way, if you don't know, Larry and Deanna are married.
For now.
So I'm really leading you with this, and there's a key here. Your best friend, lifelong best friend, came along and said, hey, I got this deal. I found this place. I want to buy it. We've agreed on all the terms. Everything's all worked out. We just need somebody to put it on paper and close it. It's your best friend. So remember my example of the transaction coordinator? They're on a fence and they got to stay there. They can't lean one way or the other. They can't fall one way or the other. They got to be perfect balance, never moving. You're telling me you're not going to represent your best friend?
You're a buyer's agent.
Yeah, thank you,
You have
Cindy.
a relationship. Sorry, I'm driving the car and I'm like, I gotta unmute this. This makes me crazy. You have a relationship with that best friend. You're not a transaction coordinator
Yeah,
at that point.
You're absolutely right. So what I want to allude to with this scenario, one, we had this a couple weeks back as to what should we do, okay? So this is the one where it's a scenario that everybody always thinks, well, because of this situation, I'm a transaction coordinator. Because if we simply look at the term transaction coordinator, that leads us to believe from an agency point that that's what we would be. But we're talking two different things. We're talking agency disclosure. So agency disclosure would only make sense as Cindy just put, this is a lifelong best friend. You're going to represent them. It has nothing to do with the situation. That's where, and I want you to all go back and take a look at what a transaction coordinator is by definition. Open up or take a look at the agency disclosure.
All right, Darwin.
So
reason,
by the way, if we put it here, would make this even a little bit clearer. Your best friend happens to be your sister.
That would make it, because see, I'm just going by the details provided in the
Right.
situation. And with that example, that does lend to me, because all I have to do is put it on paperwork and close.
You got it.
That's important. But if it's somebody I love intimately,
Right.
then I'm going to look at.
Well, see, and this is the one where it's remember, all the situations could be different. But what we're alluding to is the aspect of one, you don't need to be a transaction coordinator. That has nothing to do with the situation or the amount of compensation you're going to charge. It has everything to do with whom are you going to represent? This person came to you saying, I need you to do this. They're probably the one who's going to see that you get compensated. Being human, they're the one you are most likely to just do your natural human instincts, and you're going to represent them anyway. Because remember, this other individual, you have no idea who they are. Okay. So we're at this point, we're going to go, I'm going to represent my friend as a buyer.
all right, Darwin, hold on.
Go ahead.
If you read that paragraph, though, my interpretation was all terms have been worked out, which I would think commission, everything. All you're doing is.
No, remember, they just came to you though, Deanna. They've worked out all the terms of the purchase.
Okay.
But they haven't. Yeah, good clarification. I think that's what Tanisha was giving me here in the office too. So yeah, no, they've worked all of the terms out for them in regards to their offer.
Got it.
There's a good clarification for you. So if that got in the way, that makes a lot of sense. So we're going to represent the buyer. What paperwork do we need? I want you to think about that for a second. Okay.
We need a buyer's contract and
Yep.
agency relationship.
Those are the two biggies. We're going to need the agency. So when I put disclosures, agency disclosures for both the buyer and the seller, right? Because
Right.
I am disclosing to the buyer that I am what type of agency? Buyer's agent. I'm going to disclose to the seller that I'm what type of agent? I'm a buyer's agent. So we've got to remember what we just did with the seller, we can do with the buyer also, right? And of course, we're going to need the buyer representation contract. You guys had said that. And we're going to need a purchase agreement, right? I mean, if we really simplify what's necessary, that's all we need. Okay. Now, could we, quote unquote, list the property so it goes into the MLS and all that? Yes, but we're not dealing with how do we handle that. It's what's the required paperwork to be able to put this together. Okay. So let's go to situation number 3 here. I gotta see if I can hide or move this. Sorry, guys. So I think I've got here that there's Blue Agent A has a listing. Blue Agent B has a buyer under contract. So we're in the same office, same company. Okay. So I use Blue in this case. I didn't have another situation come up with where I could be gold. So sorry. Blue Agent B has a buyer under contract. So key, both buyer and seller are represented. Okay, that's a key. Who wishes to purchase the listing? What paperwork is necessary? I pushed my clicker one too many times and you guys already have the answers here. Agent A has already got the listing. Agent B has already got the buyer. So we have all of the paperwork that is necessary outside of the purchase agreement and do what we would always do on any transaction, be it the listing agent or the buyer's agent. So why did I bring this up? What do we not need? Or another acceptable answer would be, what are we not practicing from an agent's perspective? Tanisha nailed it, you guys. She pulled you off the hook here. There is no dual agency regarding the listing agent or the buyer's agent. It's a single agency because in my case, I got Ronnie here. Ronnie was the listing agent. I got Tanisha, who's the buyer's agent in my office within my company, each being designated to represent just one individual. So now what does occur in this situation where there is a dual agency? I'll let a manager jump in on this one.
The broker becomes a dual agent.
There you go. Way to go, Richmond office. You hit it. So yes, we need to understand in this scenario that there is a dual agency and it's for supervisory brokers. Okay. So in a case like here, Sterling Heights, so I got Ronnie and Tanisha, then I would be the supervisory broker. I'm in a dual agency position because supervisory broker, I'm supervising and I know everything that Ronnie has with his seller. I know everything that Tanisha has with her buyer. Therefore, I am the dual agent. Now, do I need to redisclose that anywhere? What say you?
It's on the purchase agreement already.
Listen to her. Crystal's awesome. They're so lucky to have her in Richmond. Yes, it's already on the purchase agreement. So anybody outside of Crystal to be able to tell me where that is?
It's on the last page, I believe.
Valerie's nailed it. Can you guys see the purchase agreement here? Is that what's on now? Or are you still seeing the PowerPoint?
We see it, number 44.
Okay, thank you. So number 44, this is why this paragraph is here. Please make sure that you fully and completely understand it, because this is the disclosure to the buyer and the seller that the supervisory broker, because it is solely a transaction of Coldwell Banker Professionals or Century 21 Professionals, that it would make the supervisory broker dual agents. This is where that disclosure comes in at. Paragraph 44 is solely there for that purpose. Okay? Any questions toward that one? All right. Let's go to situation number 4. Let's see. And this one here, somebody read that for me because I've got it on my screen. It's partially covered up.
Blue
Chris,
Agent A
oh,
has
there
a
we go. Thank you.
listing. Blue Agent A has a buyer under contract who wishes to purchase the listing. What paperwork is necessary?
Thank you, Martha. You did that really well. You get to do the next voiceovers.
You would have
So,
a mutual release to get the buyer off of the contract so you could be a dual agent.
boy, I think you just created an oxymoron, Holly, meaning you said one thing and then you said another thing, and that other thing was right, which is opposite of the other. So what you said is that we're going to be dual agents. In the end, I think that's what you said.
Yes.
But okay, so we really don't need to do anything because everything's already done for the listing. Everything's really done for the buyer. So there's nothing left to do but redisclose. See, we're not going to drop an agency relationship. We're going to continue on with both. And when we have a change in agency, then what we need to do in that situation is redisclose. And that's where the dual agency agreement comes in at. Okay. And again, it's, and Holly, thank you. Actually, you kind of predicated a bit of why this one became so important, because there's still the confusion as to one, what creates the agents or dual agency. And in this case, the clear part is it's the same agent. So now we've got the same agent representing the buyer and the seller. At HRC, we're absolutely fine with dual agency. We just need to do everything correctly, which means we have all of the normal paperwork and then we have a dual agency agreement. And it's less of an agreement and more of a disclosure, the redisclosure. Okay? Everybody good with it? So that really should be a simple one, but it's one that, again, I still get questions on and was one that I needed to make sure that we all fully grasp hold of. Okay? Any questions out there on that one? I'm going to just check my chat here real quick too, because I haven't been watching that. Happy birthday. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Marietta. And the agency dual, we got all that. Good. You guys have been answering all of those questions correctly. Let's go on to the last scenario I got for you today. Situation number 5. A buyer you have under contract finds a home they wish to purchase. A buyer whom you have under contract, therefore you represent them. You've called the listing agent asking for what the amount of compensation is being offered. You don't hear from them and you got the purchase agreement. It's all set to go. I just don't know what the compensation is. What the heck do I do? Well, we've already called them, we've texted them, we've emailed, and we want to get this offer in. How do we handle it?
Put it in the purchase agreement.
Oh, let's keep it really simple. You're absolutely right. Guys, how do I put this and make emphasis without? I don't give a rat's behind what is being offered. It doesn't matter. I hope you all understand it. It doesn't matter what's offered. Remember, we've talked about this, fighting for your compensation. You've already negotiated your compensation. When you put the purchase, well, let me rephrase that. When you got the buyer representation contract, you've already negotiated your compensation. It doesn't mean that we now turn around, even though the powers that be and created this stinking lawsuit settlement and everything else that we're having to abide by, and they're doing it because they're trying to control what we earn. No, you've already negotiated a contract. What the amount is on that contract is what you get paid. How we get paid is a different story. And that's up to the buyer as to how they want us to get paid. So here's what it says. You owe me 3%. Any money that I get from the listing broker or the seller gets credited toward this amount. Keep that as simple as it is. If I'm supposed to get 3 and I can only get 2 from somebody, what's left? Who pays it? The buyer. Okay, it's really keeping it simple. It's simple math. And the buyer already knows it. Thank you for asking. This is what we always have to remember. We're not practicing prior to August 17th, where we just sent everything over with the purchase agreement. And it was like, they signed a document that said they owe us 3%. We're actually covering this with them in advance. We're not I'll use the term slimy agent that signs them up for 1 year when they came through an open house. We discussed that one a couple of weeks back. You haven't seen it? Go back, watch that Hot Topic Tuesday. We're open. I want to say we're a culture where we take care of people honestly, openly, ethically. We want people to know what it is that they're signing. So we've negotiated all this and we've covered this with them. That's why I can have the attitude and the mentality that I have. It's because of how I work. Now, if I happen to slip that under the table and had them sign it, yeah, I should feel guilty about it. And that's when I'm probably going to have to try to negotiate my compensation. But me, no, you knew you owe me 3%. You owe me 3%. How you want me to get it? Great. In this situation, then, I'm getting all 3%. It's going right on the purchase agreement. I'm not going to even have to ask or negotiate or deal with anybody. Right? Keeps it simple. Make it easy. What's our other option? This is the one that I think people haven't really heard yet. But this is where we're taking a difficult path of trying to get it from the listing broker. Now I've got to have a broker compensation agreement signed. I haven't been able to get it. Well, then the buyer can make their offer contingent upon broker A and B fully executing a broker compensation agreement. Now, let me start that again. The buyer can make their PA contingent upon that. The buyer's making that a contingency. So you see, therefore, if it's not done and that's the way that you believe that you've got to do it, that contingency could go into the PA. But option 1 or option 2, which one's easiest to do? Yeah, everybody go. Option number 1. There's a reason that we're probably one of the few companies that actually have it on the purchase agreement. That is an option for the buyer to collect money to compensate us. Okay? Any questions about that one?
So why do you have to know that before you agree with the person, with the seller?
Yeah, the buyer's actually going to tell me to put it on the contract to check box number 5 at that point. So yeah, it's going to go right to the purchase agreement. We're going to keep it simplest way to be able to do it. paragraph number 5. It's just the easiest way to be able to do it.
Yeah, I showed that too, yeah.
Okay. And a number of you put that right into the chat session that that's the place to be able to do it. So yeah, absolutely. When all else fails, everybody knows the KISS principle of keep it simple salespeople. I always love it because some of you are new and you never heard that before, and you're going that other one, that other way of keeping it simple. So guys, that is pretty much what I've had for today. You guys got any questions that you might want to bring up? Throw them out. Anything going on for the past week or two? All right.
Issue that I
Hey,
came up.
Darwin, I got another question.
Okay.
Hey, how you doing? I was curious, have you heard anything about these laws? Is there any, in regards to the compensation? Is that I know it's a done deal now, but is that being appealed or is there any thing on the horizon?
Yeah, first thing I would do is to make sure you're not using the term laws. Because it's not a law, it's an agreement. It's a settlement that occurred as to how we've agreed to practice real estate. So really the settlement by which we're having to live on. So then the answer to that question, I know there are states where they're going, wait a minute, you can't do that. You're actually restricting trade. You're forcing a consumer to sign an agreement. Now I'm using the terms of the settlement. You're forcing them to sign a contract. And we talked about the one with our Livonia agent that got burned because of an agent that just said, well, I can't show you the house unless if you sign this. And then it was for a 1-year agreement. Oh yeah. Go back and listen to that one. So it happens, but again, we don't want to be that type of an agent. But at this point, no, I haven't heard any other updates outside of that there are states where they were filing to say you cannot force that to happen.
So if it's a rule, then I would assume NAR is the one that, the National Association is the one that negotiated the settlement?
Correct.
And that was through a lawsuit. So they negotiated a settlement, but now states are going to their individual. Do they have to opt out of NAR to do that?
I always say the first thing is I'm not an attorney. I don't know how it would work. I would have to believe, like so many other things, that it would be simply that this doesn't apply in a state of. So, I'd have to think that the state law would override a settlement agreement. But there's a process in there to be able to make that one happen. Good question.
If it's a settlement, then, I mean, would MAR be able to break off and say, we don't agree with this, or,
No, because we're all members of, what makes us realtors, thing to remember, is that we're members of a local, the state, Michigan Association of Realtors, and the National Association of Realtors. So we're all parties to that. So unless if we dropped our realtor status, no, we've agreed to abide by these because it's under that ruling that all of us are actually covered. And by the way, the agreement signed by Anywhere, which is covering us, Coldwell Banker and Century 21, they've done it with Remax. They've done it with all of the big dogs that are out there. So, all of those agreements are what's covering us from being able to be sued.
I have a question.
I think I got Livonia agent there asking first. I can't see who it is there, but let's go there, Cindy, and then I'll come back to you, Cindy.
Okay.
Okay, so what I've come across quite often is if you pull up the purchase agreement, line 5, When I'm calling or other agents are calling to find out what the co-oping compensation is, and then we ask, oh, is the broker paying our compensation or is the seller? They have no clue what we're talking about. So when we use our purchase agreement, and if you pull up line item number 5 on there, we'll put on there, seller to contribute, or we put on their listing broker co-oping broker compensation. They get confused. And I think some of our agents are still confused between seller to pay or listing broker to pay, you know?
Great. Yeah, great scenario. So with that one, and Jeff, you're absolutely right. There's still the confusion out there. So let's keep it really simple. Who does the buyer want to make responsible to pay the compensation? What's the easiest one? The seller. Okay. And if it is the seller, then all we need is that checkbox with 3% in it, or the 2.5%, whatever it may be, right? Whatever we've agreed to. They're just asking the seller to pay that. And that's the only one that we need, because the seller is paying the entire amount. Okay. The buyer is asking the seller to pay the entire amount. If the buyer said, well, why don't you get that agreement from the listing broker? We'll make the listing broker responsible for it. And you can hear the term I'm using. We're just making them responsible. Then I would check the second box, because it is the listing broker who's responsible, in which case we have our cooperating broker compensation agreement signed. Okay. If the buyer says, nope, I'll pay it, then we're just telling everybody out there, don't worry, the buyer's paying me. What's the most likely scenario that that would happen in? A cash deal. Why give the seller money to in turn pay us? It's just, it doesn't quite make sense, because it's the same amount of money regardless, right? So if the seller's no longer paying it, I'm paying it, I offer 3% less. Right? Makes sense? So keep it really simple. How is the compensation being structured? Who's responsible for paying it? When we see it from that perspective, it's either here's the purchase agreement, or it's the listing broker checked off, but we know we've got that cooperating broker compensation agreement. Keep it simple. Don't overthink it. Do I throw this out? I'm going to throw this out. I called in advance and found out that Ronnie's seller is offering 2% compensation. Now, does that mean Ronnie's seller, or does that mean Ronnie, his broker, us, Century 21? Doesn't matter. We've got an agreement that they've instructed us to offer X amount of compensation. So let's say Ronnie's agreement was only 2.5. I have an agreement with my buyer, I get 3. Well, then here's the scenario. If I don't want to overcomplicate this, I want to keep it simple. I get 2.5 from the seller, because that's what you've told me that the seller's agreed to pay. And I get the other 0.5% from the buyer. Then I check seller who's paying 2.5, and I check buyer who's paying 0.5. Right? That's a total of 3. Again, keep it simple as what it is. Who's going to pay the compensation? Make sense? So it's funny to watch people scramble for their phones.
3% doesn't mean that he doesn't care what
You got it. As long as we get our compensation in full, it doesn't matter. We just got to tell everybody how it's getting and where it's coming from. Yeah. Yep. And by the way, if you've had a closing this year or if you had a closing since August 17th. When it comes to the closing statements, has anything changed? No. Title
Ours
companies, have they, Cindy? Where
yes.
at? Who's doing yours?
I usually go through Sun Title and and I'm in the car and I'm not looking at it, but it's instead of it just showing up on that seller side when the seller is paying the buyer's agent, it's kind of, there's a column for that buyer, and I believe it's a tax deduction for them. But
Okay.
they're
So,
offsetted, but it is a little bit different than it
yeah,
was
let me ask you
before.
this. If it says that the listing broker is paying it, how's it show up on the closing statement?
Let me see.
Holy cow,
You
don't
know
look
what?
at it while you're driving, dear.
I'd have to look. I'm
Yeah,
not for
I
sure.
dare
I'm
say
trying to
that,
think of the one because I thought, well, this is,
yeah.
because you're looking.
If the
I
buyer's paying, it actually makes sense because that would just be a debit on their side. But the compensation being paid outside of closing because it's being paid by the listing broker. So here's what
I
we've
think
noticed for
that
now.
one the seller was paying
Yeah. So
all
here's
of
the
the
question. Even when
commission.
we have a cooperating broker compensation agreement, title companies are still just having the seller pay it as part of their side. That's not showing that we as a listing broker paid the compensation. It's not showing that when we're on the buyer side that the other broker is paying the compensation. Title companies are just putting it down there as it's the seller who's paying it. My book, as long as we're dealing with somebody that's got functioning gray matter, just ask the seller to pay it. If they have non-functioning or malfunctioning gray matter, then maybe we've got to say that the listing broker is paying it. In the end, we're dealing with the same money coming from the same person, giving it to the same person, right? Because it's going from the buyer to the seller to pay the brokers.
So Darwin, I recently had a sale where I put on here that the seller was paying on line item number 5. And they accepted our agreement, but changed it from seller to listing broker and called me and said, send me over that compensation agreement right away. And it was like, yeah, sure, no problem. Just make it happen. And we did.
Yeah. Yeah. There are brokers that go, well, no, we can't do it that way. It's got to be done this way. And at that point, I would expect the check to come directly from that broker. If they're going to be that, I'm going to use the term, if they're going to be that anal about it, that you've got to say that because of your contract, well, then you'd better be writing me the check and not showing on a closing statement that seller paid it.
So
right?
the other agent and the other broker were just so nice. They were, I mean, just so pleasant and said, just do it this way and we'll make everybody happy. And we're,
Yeah.
okay, we'll
Yep.
do it. We will make everybody happy. And
Yeah,
it was,
and that's
it was
where-
easy.
You know what, Jeff? That's where I'm using the aspect that you either have an agent whose gray matter is malfunctioning or a seller whose gray matter is malfunctioning. And look, as long as you get paid and it's legal, make it work. And that's a great scenario where that's that one where it's, oh no, we're paying it, so send me over the broker compensation agreement. Great. And of course, we know that if we did seller shall contribute, that's got to be crossed off. That's going to be a counter offer if they want to do it that way. Because, and Jeff, I think you put it in there. We never want to commit a seller to pay the buyer fee twice. Once them directly through the purchase agreement and another indirectly through the listing broker. So rarely will we have those two boxes checked unless if it's a portion from one and a portion from the other. Which again, my book, that's malfunctioning gray matter, but Jeff just hit it. Whatever it takes to keep it simple. So as long as we get paid because we put a transaction together, it makes a happy seller and a happy buyer. Good stuff. Guys, you got others? Anybody else?
I have one.
Yes, Cindy, I'm sorry, we forgot about you.
That's okay. And I don't know if because I took this class a long time ago. Oh, but it seems like on the accredited buyers class, it said something like if you're having an open house, basically they told you to have every person that comes through there sign that they know you're the seller's agent. And they also said that if you have like a friend do an open house for you, that they had to have them sign an agency that you were about the seller's agent.
There's something out there, and again, I would refer everyone to watch January 7th's Hot Topic Deep Dive with Brian Westron from our MAR Legal Counsel. Okay. About the 54-minute mark, you can tell how often I've had to talk about this one. Brian addresses the aspect of what we need to do in an open house. So I'm going to say work with your manager on it, but here's the basics. When the settlement first came out, they said, because you're there representing the seller, you do not need to have anyone sign anything. What no one thought about was, what about in a designated agency situation? Because see, if you're there holding an associate's home open, are you designated to represent the seller? And I'm just going to pose questions, and then you guys can, sorry, Martha and my other managers, you guys can go have conversations with your managers as to how you want to handle it. I will tell you from my perspective, and I'm going to be a little braggadocious here. Since this settlement came out, I haven't missed on anything. And Brian Westron came out January 7th and said the best way, realistically dealing with humans, would be to simply designate that agent to also represent the seller. Because remember this, what would it be like to say, hi, before you come in, you need to know that I'm not representing you until you sign this contract, and you've got to sign this contract to come into this house. And oh, by the way, you're going to see that I get paid 3%. If we're doing that correctly, because, oh, by the way, if you're doing that, what else has to be signed? Agency disclosure. It makes it really, really difficult, because there's what they gave us to function with, what they're forcing the consumer to do to be able to go see an open house, which destroys the whole reason that we have consumers so willingly able to come to an open house. So the answer is, if you represent the seller, you do not need to have a buyer sign an agreement, unless you're going to represent them.
So
and there are situations where you would do that.
if you're holding an open house and you represent the seller, then you can't ask everybody who comes to the open house to sign a 1-year buyer agency contract.
I suppose you could, but I wouldn't, because we're there on behalf of the seller. Yeah, I like the way you're thinking, Jeff. Again, go back 2 weeks to that hot topic. We had a great one as to, I'll share the quick story on it. So one of our Livonia agents working with a buyer, no contract was signed yet, went visiting open houses. An agent says, before I can show you this house, you've got to sign this agreement. The buyer, not being familiar with anything, signs it for a 1-year agreement. $1 million plus property. Not to mention that in this particular agreement that this buyer signed, it said if you sell any property within, I think 12 months it was, that you have to list it with us. So educate your buyers. Educate your buyers. Get them under contract. Yep. So I'll tell you, there's good stuff when we get out there and we're working and we're sharing these thoughts and ideas. It's where everything really comes from. Guys, you got anything else?
I have another scenario I want to bring up.
All right.
I had a call this weekend and it was my stepson. And he said his neighbor wanted to see this repossessed property and that he wanted to look at it too. And I go, well, because we're supposed to have these contracts signed prior to showing him any property. I don't even know the neighbor's name. I'm always getting myself into something like this. And I mean, it just happens to me. And it's like, okay, I could have my stepson, sign the contract. What about the other guy, the neighbor, and possibly if he wanted to buy it, they thought about, but thank God the thing was sold already. So I thought, I was kind of stressed out.
Yeah.
I don't know the neighbor's name at all. I'm always getting something like this. Second time it's happened to me in less than.
So let me see if I understand it right, Cindy, because I think this is something that if people haven't run into it, they will. But you've got a buyer whom you're going to go show the house to.
Yes.
And you got that all covered. We know that that's got to have a signed agreement prior to showing because it's not our listing, right?
Yeah, but he's bringing a friend that might want to buy it too.
So there's two. So if it was just a friend who happened to be with him, I wouldn't worry about it. But if he's going, well, I might want to buy it too.
Mm-hmm.
We should technically have an agreement with him.
With both of them.
Yep. Each one have an individual because each one is a buyer. You just happen to be doing 2 and 1.
Well, the thing is, I think they live on the same street of this repossessed property, and I think they were tire kicking. So you're trying not to tick anybody off, but it's like,
well, remember the one thing is that it doesn't need to be 30 days. It doesn't need to be 6 months. It could be 6 months for that property.
Yep.
And that's why our buyer representation agreement is structured the way that it is. It's so that we can do just one property. And oh, by the way, if the neighbor then came over and said, hey, could you show me that property? Sure. But what's he got to do first? Got to sign an agreement. And if you're signing an agreement, what has to come along with it?
Agency
disclosure. Yep. Really, when we get down to it, if we just keep it simple, we know what to do. And that's where, doing what we're doing and me throwing these out the way I do is to be able to cause you to begin thinking about it so that when you run into unique situations like this, you just go, oh, well, you're a buyer. I don't represent the seller. So you got to sign a contract. So we just keep it simple like that.
So, and back to the open house. So you're holding an open house for your friend on their house.
So you say friend, give me more, define that more, who the friend is.
What if I'm doing one for another agent in the office or another agent that I've got friends, our whole office blew up.
Okay. So you're holding a house open that is listed with our company.
Yeah. What if it's listed with 5-star though?
Well, let me rephrase your question. Do we want to allow agents from other companies to hold our listings open? No. Let me say that another way. No. Here's the reason, guys. We don't offer compensation to sub-agents. What would somebody from another company asking to hold our houses open, what would they have to be? They'd have to be a sub-agent. So if we don't offer compensation to sub-agents, we wouldn't allow other companies, other agents at other companies to hold our listings open. And guys, there's a number of rookies every weekend that would love to hold a house open that's worth holding open. Tanisha just put like both arms up, really. So if you got anything around Sterling Heights, Troy, yeah, she's open to it.
Okay, what are you recommending though? Say I hold an open house for another agent out of Lansing. And so when the buyers are coming in, I need to have that buyer sign a contract saying that I'm there working for the seller.
Well, no, I'm
An
going to give you
agency
my
an
recommendation.
agency relationship.
Okay. So I'm going to give you my recommendation. If you're my agent, I am going to designate you to represent that seller. However, who's your manager there now? Are you Erica or Craig or?
Erica is the supervisory manager.
There you go. You're going to go ask Erica what she wants you to do and how to handle it.
Okay, I was just wondering I still question it just from taking the class. I haven't really had
so
that
the simple
happen.
answer, simple. Do what your manager says. Simple from the ruling, the settlement. If you represent the seller, you don't need to have them sign anything. If you do not represent the seller, you must have them sign. And if you have them sign an agreement, a contract, then you got to have them sign because you're representing them. Then you'd have to have them sign the disclosure also. So it really is, when we break it down and we get rid of all of the wind blowing out of the northwest at 30 miles per hour on a 68-degree day when it was nice and sunny with clouds in the sky, and we get rid of all the crap. Do you represent the seller or not? If you don't, then you have to have that buyer sign a contract.
All right,
if
Darwin.
you're going to show them the home. Yes,
So
sir.
Here's a question that was posed. If you're holding my house, my listing open, and you're representing the seller, my seller, do you have to be on the listing contract?
No.
Because a lot of agents have been asking that, and they're like, oh, I don't want anybody to hold my house open because I don't want them to be my
I
seller.
think, Jeff, that we should have documentation for it.
Yes.
But to me, that could be as simple as an agency disclosure and put that address on there.
And you can say just for that open house, right?
Yeah, well, I don't think it matters because we've discussed it and it's like, well, can I do it for a day? Well, yeah, but you represented them at one point. When does that really end?
Right. So now what happens? You hold my house open, you're working for the seller, and 2 weeks later, you just happen to have a buyer that wants to buy that house and you've signed a contract with them. Now, are you a dual agent? Are you a seller? You know, you have to be a dual agent because you already signed with that buyer.
Yes.
Even though you've never met those sellers before, you held their house open once a couple weeks ago. Yes.
Yeah, that's just keeping it simple because I represent the seller. And again, here, let me give you this scenario, guys, because it's something you have to think about, and we've never, ever addressed it. But you've gone out on a competing listing situation. You asked a whole lot of questions, got a whole lot of private, confidential information from that seller. You never disclosed in writing. That is a violation of state law. And you didn't get the listing. And it just happens to be a couple of weeks later, you come around with a buyer whom you represent, and you're going, oh my gosh, you need to see this house. You'd better at least do some disclosure to the buyer, because gang, what you have is implied agency. The only difference is you didn't disclose your agency up front and you never got a contract signed. But that's called implied agency. And if any of us, it would be a rookie who hasn't had this yet. But we've all been out on competitive listing situations. By the way, has anybody ever gotten in trouble for not disclosing up front in writing?
I'm questioning, am I up?
Yep, you're on, Sydney.
Okay, I didn't know if I muted it or not. Well, I'm kind of questioning, I guess what's running through my mind is, you're on a competing listing. You're really not the seller's agent at that point because they haven't hired you. But they
let me
are
ask you this.
disclosing.
Did you walk like an agent? Say yes.
Yes.
Did you talk like an agent? Yes.
Yes.
Then you were their agent. Through
So,
your actions, through your words, you've implied agency. And in the state of Michigan, when you walk like an agent, talk like an agent, it's not that you might be, you is one.
well, on that particular house, then, if you're in competition, you're the agent that didn't get the listing, you take a buyer through there do you now have to be a dual agent? And not disclose anything the seller told you to your buyer? And you
Well,
can't really be a buyer's agent because you got pertinent
well,
information from that seller.
so see, Cindy, that's where I'm going. There's the laws and there's the real world. And if anybody is who's been in that has ever had their hand slapped, please advise me at this point, because I would put a whole lot of money that not even one agent has ever had their hand slapped because of that. And probably at least 50% of the people on this have been in a competing situation and have run into that. So all I'm saying is you got to know that by all technical laws, you implied agency. Therefore, you did represent the seller. Though you never had a contract, it's called implied agency, and all of us learned that in pre-license training. So if you did represent that seller, do you have privileged confirmation information? Yes. Do you have confidential information? Absolutely, positively. Can you disclose that to the buyer? Absolutely not. So what I should do is simply advise the buyer why I know this property and that I may have information that I cannot dissolve to them, or is that the word? I can't give you the information, disclose to you, because I represented them when I gained that information. So look, it's just being very upfront, because believe me, there are things that you got that you should not disclose. Okay.
Now, how long? Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate again. How long's that contract last then? You did not get it. I mean, a year later.
That's a great question.
That basement got water in it.
When does your duties of confidentiality end?
When the house is sold?
Anybody?
Upon death.
Ever.
Never. Never, ever. Your duties of confidentiality are 100% and never end.
Question I got on that. Okay, say that basement's leaked or it's got a crack. It's covered up. The next buyer covers it up. So that's not even, it's a year later. You have knowledge of that and you're a buyer's agent.
Well, by God, you better disclose that.
You have a home inspection.
Yeah, the key here on this one would be you brought up that it is covered up. Okay. So it's now a material defect. It's not discoverable without doing damage to the property. You shouldn't have to disclose it. The seller should. Okay, so that should already be disclosed. But that would be one because it's a material defect, they should have, and therefore we would. I'm just looking, Holly in here. Seller offers 2.5 for broker compensation. Buyers asking sellers to pay the 3. Seller does not want to pay that extra 0.5%. Would the deal be, would it not go through, or would the selling broker take the 0.5% to their compensation? Let me, because Holly, you've been around long enough. Everybody knows concessions for closing costs, taxes, prepaids. If I replace the word concession for compensation, would the deal go through? May not, but it might. Might the listing broker bite it, or the selling broker bite it? Yep, they might. But why should I negotiate my compensation, especially if that's a hard cost that the buyer is responsible for? So, matter of fact, let's take a 3% compensation for the buyer's broker and 3% concession. In talking to the mortgage broker, the buyer needs that 3%. They can't do it at 2.5. What would you do? I'll tell you what I would do. If that's all that's standing in the way of getting this offer accepted, seller, increase it by 0.5%. Give me the 3%. It won't work without it. If it's compensation, look, that's a hard cost. If you can't say yes to that, increase the purchase price by 0.5%. Whatever it is, they're short. Again, we've got to keep it as simple as possible. I'm sorry, Michael, if you didn't get an answer to that yet. A competitive listing is when I'm out and competing for a listing against another agent. By the way, that could be within our same company, within the same office. So a good one. All right. Well, it looks like we got ourselves all the way whittled down to about 24 of us right now. Anything else that you guys got burning questions on? Because we're now at 1:03. I was done at 24 minutes after. It's great when you guys get the questions. All right. So we're going to end it. Of course, if any time period you guys got anything that comes up, please email me and let me know the circumstances. Obviously, if it's complicated, give me a call. So I appreciate you guys. Thanks again for joining me on another Hot Topic Tuesday, and we will see you next week.
Thank you.
You got it, Cindy. Thanks for being a great participant.
Have a great day.
Thanks. Have a good day.
See you, bud. See y'all.